Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Mob Psycho 100 Season 2, Episode 6. A great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So we're immediately picking up with Mob in the Body Improvement Club, and though it's little by little, he has made strides, even to the point Dimple thought it was all a waste of time, but he's seeing that all of this is good. The fact is the people around him, especially the Body Improvement Club, they are so supportive, where it's just like, yo, my God, look at the progress you made. Oh my God, so awesome, Mob. Oh, Kageyama, but still, it's the situation of, even Dimple recognizes, like, right, this will be good for Mob's confidence. Like, he is getting better and better, and it's going to make him bolder and more confident. And, even the telepathy club are even kind of like, wow, I wasn't expecting Mob to kind of go as hard into painting this, and he's made progress. Even one of the members is like, oh yeah, it's actually my birthday. And they're like, and I love, was it Musashi Grum's over? He's like, it's your birthday, and they start tossing him up too. And then one of the members is like, actually, Captain, it was my birthday last week. And he was like, what? I didn't know. So they all, Telepathy Club and the Body Improvement Club, go hang out. Obviously, what's her name? Who's the head of the Telepathy Club? Tomei, still bringing up the point of, you're actually supposed to be helping me find more telepaths and stuff like that. It's like, well, he still hasn't introduced her to Taruki. So, I mean, and also, like, all those kids that Taruki, like, ended up meeting up with and training for, the inevitable day that Claw comes after them again. But it's like, right, he knows a handful of psychics. He hasn't even introduced her to his brother either, so just kind of like not really doing anything on that front. But yeah, they were actually going to all hang out and go to karaoke, which Mob was kind of enjoying, because he's like, oh, he's just taking all in, because he's like, man, I haven't done this in like ever. Like, we haven't seen a lot of Mob's backstory, but it does seem like, and this is something I've commented on too, it's like, for the first time, Mob has people in his life. He has friends, and that was never the case before. And he's enjoying that. And at the same time, this episode gave us a little bit more insight into Regan. Kind of a lot more insight. A lot of stuff that was already there, but I'd never really given it much thought before. Like, we had the opening where it seemed like Regan just had like a regular, maybe like cubicle 9-to-5 job. I mean, it was like he was answering the phone and stuff like that. He left, rented out his space, and at the time he didn't know what he was going to do, and I guess he just randomly stumbled across the whole spiritual stuff as like a gig. So either way, like, he's here taking on jobs, and he hears about a ghost, and he asks Mob to shows up, and Mob's like, oh, I don't want to. Like, I told you, like, stop asking me to show up for work last second. He's like, oh, you're not really doing anything important anyway, right? Come on down. And Mob reluctantly has to go. He's like, I'm sorry. But the rest of the crew was like, nah, we get it. You have to do, like, some things are more important. They're like, we'll hang out next time, because he was feeling bad. He's like, it's both your guys. We're celebrating both your guys' birthdays. And they're like, no, we totally understand, Mob. And I think that just made him feel worse in the long run. And so he shows up to the job and immediately gets rid of the ghost. But then, like, he's upset with Regan, and Regan makes the mistake of running his mouth off about, like, right, what'd you do at that Body Improvement Club? It's not really important. And the moment he says that, that was already strike one, because it's like, that club, unlike Regan, who is not always the most supportive of Mob. He can be in times, but it's also because Regan benefits from that. And a lot of stuff and that's the hypocrisy behind him time and time again. He wants to call out all these other people. Oh, these people are using you, Mob, this, that, and the third. And it's like, well, you're the main perpetrator of it. And he says, like, oh, these people, they don't really care about you. They're not really your friends. It's like, that's messed up, because these people do like Mob. Like, the Body Improvement Club don't care anything about him having powers. And even like the Telepathy Club, Tomei's the only one really still holding on to, like, oh, introduce us to other telepathy people. But she also just likes hanging around Mob too. But the rest of the club don't really think about that. It's like, oh, cool. Like, we're just chilling in what is now the Body Improvement Club. So we're just like chilling and doing, that's all they cared about anyway, was just like, that's what made them care about the Telepathy Club. So these aren't people who care about that stuff with Mob. They just like being around Mob and care for him. They are legitimately his friends. And for Regan to be so dismissive of all that, because this is important to Mob, it's helping him grow as a person. And even Regan was like, oh, like, I'm kind of messing up, because Mob was just kind of like, right, I kind of starting to believe that you I shouldn't follow everything you say. And Regan kind of goes like, "Oh, like I'm sorry." Like he didn't realize he recognizes after the fact that he messed up. But it's in those moments that moment is where it triggered in me, where I'm like, "Huh, interesting." Whereas like Mob used to be so alone, he's not, because that's why he latched on to Regan. He was so afraid of his abilities, and he kind of wasn't. He hadn't really grown as a person, but he's grown so much over this season and a half, and now it's the thing that Regan's starting to recognize over these past few episodes. He goes, "Oh, Mob's actually started to change," but he kind of took it for granted and just assumed like, well, things are the same as they've always been with Mob, not recognizing like, no, you recognize it, but you're choosing not to recognize that Mob has grown, that he's not the same kid anymore. That it's like you made this whole point to the members of Claw, specifically the Scars, about being a part of society and kind of being adults and stuff, and Mob is growing into his own person. He's not just that empty husk you can just like toss around and bring around whenever you need. You know, the whole point was like, yes, you cared about helping him to some extent. You were dismissive of that at first because you didn't believe he had powers, and then when you found out, you gave him some advice. But he'd also made this point where he was like, Mob needs me. Like, I mean, aren't you afraid of like, you know, if it wasn't for me, you wouldn't be able to control your powers? And yes, he will always be grateful for that. He believes you are his master and you care about him, which once again, the audience and a lot of people in this series recognize that he's a scam artist, he's super shady and stuff like that. But like I said, it's like Regan can have his head so far up his own ass that he starts believing his own bullshit sometimes. And this was kind of a rude awakening for him in a lot of ways, because Mob stopped showing up at the office because he was just kind of like, I've decided to take a step away from hanging around Master, because he's like, I need to start making my own choices, because I used to believe like, hey, whatever Regan says, I'll go along with it because it's a lot easier, because, you know, once again, he hadn't really found himself as a person, but now he's grown, and now it's like, no, it's time for me to start making my own choices, do what I want to do, you know? And like I said, it's just super dismissive of Regan to basically shit on all the progress Mob had made, because he never realized, like, oh, the people around Mob are legitimately his friends. He's not the lonely kid he was anymore, because that's the thing. Mob latched onto him because he had no one. Like I said, I never really took until this episode to be like, holy shit, Regan's done the exact same thing. Regan latched onto Mob because, as we see, outside of work, we don't get to see Regan's life, but we see Mob go to school. We see him, hanging around his friends, going to the club, trying to better himself. But Regan isn't. He kind of makes a worse version of himself because, you know, and I think that's the beautiful thing too when you think about it. Mob is young, and like when you're younger, it's easy to break certain habits. So he's young enough to change. You can change as an adult, it's just harder. And Regan's just cemented himself into who he's been for at least these past 4 years. We don't know like if Regan was exactly the same way, like whether he really didn't have anyone in his life prior to this, like prior to like him starting this all up 4 years ago. We saw him leaving the office, kind of doing his thing, I think it's kind of indicative of when you look, when he left, no one said goodbye to him. No one's like, oh my God, Regan. He just left with his stuff and then moved into this new office. So it kind of shows that he probably didn't have many friends really growing up. So I think that's why he probably looked a lot at Mob. It's like, right, I saw a lot of myself, but the problem is Mob has made all the progress to change and Regan hasn't. And once again, you're older, it's a little harder to change because those habits are so like ingrained in you. And so he thought it was like, oh, Mob needs me, not recognizing how much he needs Mob. Even though he literally calls Mob in to deal with any spiritual situation, it's still the thing of he still acts like he's the one in control. Like he's so delusional in that regard. And I think, like I said, this was a rude wake up for him. I mean, hell, he's still delusional enough to be like, Mob, I don't have to worry about the pay and stuff like that, even though you're paying Mob not even the bare minimum, less than the bare minimum, just for him to do his job, even though he does like 95% of the heavy lifting, except, you know, with the exception of the jobs where you're able to bullshit your way through it. The serious jobs, Mob is doing everything. But yeah, every once in a while you get those jobs you're able to BS your way through. So But he's kind of like, oh, Mob, he's going to come back to me. It's going to be fine. Because he's like, right, I built this whole place up by myself long before I met Mob, so it's perfectly fine. And he's like, yeah, I'm sure that kid's feeling awful and lonely and stuff like that. But he was talking for himself because he sees Mob hanging out with his friends. And Dimple had to bring that up of like, nah, Mob's actually having fun. He's not really thinking about you. And you're the only one that was kind of thinking about him. And then he tried to turn it on Dimple by being like, well, the more Mob is hanging around his friends and the more happy he is, the less he's going to be using his powers. Are you ready to just be the pet to some normal middle schooler? And Dimple's like, well, it seems like you're doing okay, and bounces. He's like, I guess we'll never see each other again type of thing, because Mob will have less and less reason to show up for work. So, I mean, Risu was happy about all of this too, because it's like, oh, I get to hang out with my brother. I mean, that's another thing too. Mob's also got a much better, obviously Mob didn't realize at the time him and Risu had such a contentious relationship, but they're definitely in a much better place. His life has gotten so much better, and he's only started to realize it more and more this season about how good his life is, and the people around him, and how much of a, impact they have on you, because, it's a two-way street. You have an impact on people, but people have an impact on you. And it's just like, it's been a one-way street for so long for Mob. He's kind of blocked people off, and people have kind of blocked him off. But now that's, like I said, it's like a two-way street now, whereas Regan, it continues to be a one-way street until he adjusts things. So he goes to that bar and he's drinking, and he's like, yeah, this bar is where everyone comes just to complain about stuff. So he's like, honestly, these people here are people who get caught up in scams and fake cults and stuff. And he's like, yeah, these are people that are pretty much my clientele. And he's like, yeah, they come here to complain to me about some of their stuff. And I give them like small advice, and it seems to make the biggest world of difference to them, and it makes them happy. And he's like, oh, these people are kind of like my friends. And he tells them like, oh, today is my birthday. He didn't even realize it until he got like an email online, this version of like Facebook. He's like, oh, like you could check in on old friends and stuff. But he got 0 birthday messages, because he made him go like, oh shit, like no one's reaching out to me. Oh, except for one person, his mom, who's like, hey honey, you're 28, it's not too late. You can have more business opportunities. Like, you need to find like a more secure job. Oh, like our neighbor, like one of their kids or their youngest or oldest or whatever just got married. You still have that in front of you. Hey, here's this business like called Whitey's or whatever. You should like look into it. And so it's just, once again, it's just that reality smacking Regan in the face of like, I'm alone. I kind of have no one. The only person wishing me a happy birthday is my mom. Mob would probably celebrate and be around you like, oh my God, happy birthday, master. Even if they are in the awkward spot they're in, it's just probably because Mob doesn't know, because Regan probably doesn't talk about himself a lot. So. But yeah, like he's at the bar and he's like talking to his friends, and they're like, oh, happy birthday. But then they're like, yeah, but they keep going on. And he's like, right. I kind of thought for a second, like I wanted to believe they were my friends. It's like, they're the closest thing he had to friends. But it was like, yeah, it was everything he was saying, like, oh yeah, these ain't real relationships. These are just people who are just going to use you. It's like all the stuff he was saying to Mob about like the people he would hang out with, his real friends, ends up blowing back and getting shoved in Regan's face now, because these people aren't really your friends. That lady's like, oh yeah, here's this comfortable pillow or whatever that's like 120,000 yen typically. It's like she's trying to sell him something because it's his birthday and stuff. So it made him kind of realize, and he's sinking into despair because of it. Even the bartender was like, I actually didn't put much alcohol in this drink, if any at all. And here's, Regan acting drunk. It's just because he's drowning his own despair. He's throwing up. And then in like that beautiful but sad parallel of like those like mops or whatever, like hanging around the light, one of them dies at that moment, and he's having his realization about everything and just being so alone. But this was kind of his root, like I said, root awakening, where he's like, hey, I'm going to change things. So going forward, he's trying to do a lot more for the community. He's trying to beautify the city. He's helping out more, taking on even more jobs. I mean, he has gotten more and more popular. So he's helping out just the general in the community, but he's also like the jobs he normally could handle without Mob, he's handling them with vigor. There's the one, kill player, like it was a cursed video game thing. None of the other psychics would take the job. It's a thing that he believes even Mob couldn't handle because it's in a video game. So he spends money to, microtransactions and stuff like that to boost up his character, and he kills the ghost. And it's like, oh, I won. I did the dang. He has all these pictures up of like, yeah, here are me and my clients and my customers who are satisfied. So yeah, he's in the red now, but yeah, everything has been working towards making more and more popular. I love the percentage thing now being shifted to which is an interesting parallel to the OVA in between season 1 and 2, where that one was about his like lie to himself, and then like at the end of it, reality smacked him in the face. He's kind of going through that again, but now it's like, hey, now this percentage is about popularity, which immediately makes me think of like the Phantom Thieves popularity in Persona 5 / Persona 5 Royal. He gets interviewed for like a magazine or newspaper or something like that, and because of his popularity, it's like, oh, you'll be on TV, which I immediately was like, being on TV is probably not a good idea, because you'll probably be put in a situation where it's like, hey, prove that you're a psychic, and it's going to be revealed that you're a fraud. But we also find out at the end, oh, him being on TV is for exactly that same purpose, because it turns out, was it Johto, because of the situation, the last situation from episodes 4 and 5, when he had that flying knee kick from Regan, he's upset and he wants to kind of embarrass Regan on TV. So he's the one that kept like promoting me like, oh, you need to bring this guy on. And so that's the only reason why Regan's in the situation he's in right now. So we'll see. Obviously, the situation will probably blow up to the point that Mob has to get involved just to back up his master. But yeah, I'm curious to see how much Regan fully grows. He's grown, but I'm curious like how much of this will stick in the aftermath of this situation. Will he take 2 steps forward just to take 2 steps back? Because even this feels like, is it real growth? Like, you kind of learn, but I feel like you really haven't. It's like, what is his relationship with Mob? Like, has it even changed any at all post this? It's going to be interesting to see, but I'm excited to see where the next episode ends up taking us going forward with all of this. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.